Welcome back. Jeff Barrett is a Shorty Award winning content creator who works with Fortune 500 companies on communications strategy. Jeff has been featured in Forbes, Business Insider, and CNN, just to name a few. He is a branding and marketing expert and joins us to discuss the future of work. Thanks for joining us, Jeff.
Hey, thanks for having me. Those are really high expectations to meet, but I'll see what I can do.
Now we know that recently people have moved jobs at a record rate. What do you recommend employers need to do to retain talent?
Before we even start that discussion, I always like to stop, pause, and say it's a privilege to be able to move a job. It's still hard to find a job there for a lot of people. It kind of depends on industry, right? When we're seeing this great migration, we're seeing it for a variety of reasons, but we're seeing an uptick in it because there are a lot of variances in how that job might look, how much flexibility you might have. I think the very big key of why people are moving is flexibility. Now, the interesting question down the road is this flexibility temporary or is this flexibility permanent? Now, interestingly enough, employers have seen this and obviously have moved to a term called hot desking, where essentially if you have 100 employees, rather than having a 100-person office, you have kind of a coffee shop feel of about 20 employees, or 20 hot desks that aren't assigned. Now, that's great from from the internal standpoint of the company. But for the people who are working there, everybody has different working styles. So I think it's going to be very key to, one, make sure that these perks are permanent, make sure the flexibility is permanent, and also be mindful that some people love working with a lot of flexibility and some people still like having pictures at a desk.
I know that my desk personally is an organized mess, and I can't imagine having anyone else sitting at it or dealing with it. What is a role that companies don't currently have that they should focus more on creating in the near future?
Yeah, I also have that organized mess. And I guess the flip side of that, right, is if you're not assigned to that desk, is it your mess? Maybe it's somebody else's mess. I don't know. Um, Interestingly enough, as we navigate a lot of workplace environments, if we get into diversity, equity, inclusion, if we're talking about making sure that people's flexibility is just as important as their output, right? I think there's a need for having more psychologists in your HR department, because right now an HR department does a lot of great functions, but it's mostly there to make sure the mechanics of the organization go forward. It's not there to kind of coach and make sure you're happy and make sure you're retained. We have some elements of retention based into HR, but I think having a designated psychologist in that company, as long as even if you're mid-size, is going to help to retain talent, move things forward, and make sure people are more efficient. Because when people are happier and more comfortable and they're seeing what they want out of their job, they're going to be more efficient. And if you need a kind of a real world example of it, if you watch Billions, Wendy Rhodes, but not to that level of drama and scale.
Getting into brick and mortar versus e-commerce, how are companies getting creative to still drive brick and mortar sales?
That's an interesting quandary too, right? So Domino's is tipping you $3, and I say tipping you, they're giving you an extra $3 incentive to go to the store. Now that's partly because yes, you need to justify the physical space, but it's also because there's just a shortage of people who want to do delivery driving jobs. Interestingly enough, we've seen this kind of space in both fast food and delivery drivers and in certain wage level jobs where there's just better options, or there's different options, or there's the sharing economy, or rideshare apps, or there are other ways to make money. So it's just that job itself isn't going well. It's not getting a lot of people. So Domino's is trying to kind of do that with brick and mortar. You've seen Pizza Hut kind of downscale their restaurants from the buffet style restaurant to more of the Domino's or Little Caesars model, where they're kind of one set place. That's an incentive. The more important incentive that you're going to see is, we as consumers absolutely love delivery apps. Over the last 2 years, we've gotten really used to delivery apps. I mean, Uber Eats is advertising you can get anything delivered, not just food. And then people accidentally eat things that aren't food. What is interesting on the back end of that, and why brick and mortar will still be important, is if you're a restaurant and your dish costs $15 and you use a delivery app, The end user gets charged 20 and you get take home 10 because the delivery apps charge you about 30 to 33%. This becomes untenable on the retail side. So you're going to see a push to get people to come back, do takeout, do brick and mortar. Even if we as a consumer love the convenience of the delivery app, it doesn't work on a business model side. But
Yeah, I mean, but restaurants, small business restaurants, not the big
mhm,
chains.
yeah,
How can they compete in this new landscape? How could they try to drive people back to their restaurants and not go through these apps? And how are they able to
right,
survive?
right. I mean, there are strategies to get people to come into the restaurant, right? It's going to have to be about making the experience of going in there or being there actually fun to be there, versus just kind of standard fare. I think we got pretty comfortable with what restaurants, especially kind of like suburban chain restaurants were in the 90s and 2000s, and they kind of all started to look the same. So now it's more going to be about limiting how much space you have. Understand, especially for small restaurants too, is if you have limited space, that's good because that's less cost. But also remember that you're going to need to be running people in and out more quickly. One of the big problems for small restaurants is if you're a steakhouse or if you're a large scale Italian or you're doing something that takes a little bit of time and your average customer's there for about 75 minutes, but you only have eight tables, it's going to be hard to stay afloat doing that.
Thank you, Jeff, for coming on.
Hey, great to be here. Appreciate it.
More to come after the break.